Oh, thank you very much. And ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to be here, which will probably be my last act as CCDG. However, I do have a passion for integration, and I'm very, very interested in the outcomes of this conference, and have been for my time in CDG, in dealing with what is probably the single biggest problem Defence has, and most of our other problems, many of which you will know, are all connected to the integration problem. So our goal in the ADF is to create and maintain a balanced and well-integrated ADF that can fight and win. No-brainer. Especially through time as we transition from the current force, so that's the force in being, through to the funded force, that's the force that's funded by the Defence Capability Plan, through to the objective force, the one that's described by our concepts and our visualisations of where we think we might be based on technology and concepts into the future. That through time is one of our biggest challenges. So the management of the development of the capabilities represented in the DCP is paramount to Defence's modernisation. The key consideration in all of this is integration. The risks to integration I see are at three levels. The first one is the tactical risk, and that is that projects are not well managed as programs, and so that the interdependencies between projects threaten the capability, and there is poor integration even between projects that are entering service, let alone in service, not to mention losing control of cost and schedule. Then there's the operational risk, and that is that we lack the innovation and the processes to be sufficiently agile to assure our capability against the enemy, in particular where the innovation affects the integration of those capabilities. And the strategic risk is that our force lacks the integration and interoperability to be effective in the widest range of missions likely to be assigned by government, or to ensure effective cooperation with coalition partners. Integration is the close and seamless coordination between systems. It is as simple as that, and we torture ourselves with all the things that could be assigned to the word integration. At its heart, integration, as we commonly refer to it today, refers to a problem that has been evolving since we entered the information or the digital age. When there became an alternative to voice, Morse and flags that offered the prospect of taking the human out of the communications loop, we, the ADF, started looking at knowledge dominance, the knowledge edge, etc. These were defined early and simply as the effective exploitation of information technologies to allow us to use the relatively small force to maximum effectiveness. The revolution in military affairs, or RMA, and then NCW, network-centric warfare, trace their origins back to Australia's Strategic Policy 1997 and in 1999 with the creation of the Office of RMA in Defence. The White Paper Defence 2000, our future Defence Force, described thus, quote, RMA technologies impact the ability to know more than one's adversary in relevant areas. This can result in a decisive military advantage when linked with appropriate weapons and concepts of operation, unquote. NCW was embraced more formally in ADF doctrine in the NCW Roadmap of 2003 and several subsequent published versions of it, the last one being in 2009, coincident with the Force 2030 White Paper. The NCW concept centres on a command and control grid, a sensor grid and an engagement grid, all within a supporting information network. Success in an NCW context is achieved by effectively linking command and control, sensor and engagement systems via a network to facilitate enhanced situational awareness, collaboration and offensive potential. Personnel within the network force rely on secure and responsive linkages that allow the right information to be accessed at the right time by the right force elements. Increases in combat power from being a network force are derived from the quality and timeliness of shared information and through the exploitation of new systems and command relationships. I'm sure there isn't one person in this room who hasn't heard all that before who doesn't understand what that means. Anyone who's ever been on operations understands that's the core of what we're talking about. Integration means we've got to be able to work more and more with information that does not require the inject from a human, so we can do something about getting the information to the right place, right time, etc. These concepts offer a potentially valuable force multiplier effect that can extend and deepen the capability of the ADF. As a small ADF with a large geographic responsibility, it offered us the hope that we would be able to punch above our weight, which we've heard many times before, especially when confronted with a larger and stronger potential adversary. We need the advantage of manoeuvre over mass. All of these concepts, the last of which was published over 5 years ago, were leading to getting inside the enemy's OODA loop by making better and faster decisions. Today we talk about common operating pictures, data fusion, data services, interoperable open architectures, big data and the Internet of Things. So you see where we've been shifting. But in simple terms, they amount to a better integration of the joint force in the battle space. To the warfighter, this simply means a better informed decision at the time and place the decision needs to be made. But clearly this is not as simple as it sounds, because we've all had problems and we've had our fair share of them too. There are, of course, many considerations to be made in the journey to optimally integrate the force. We are first focused on integrating the three services into the ADF. This is a fundamental inputs to capability challenge. That's called vertical integration. But we must at all times keep our eyes on the potential for the need to integrate with the US and other significant and likely coalition partners. That's horizontal integration. And most importantly, we need to consider the effort to be applied to the planning and execution of the development of emerging capabilities to be sure that when introduced into service, the present is not compromised by the headlong rush to grasp the latest technology without due consideration of vertical and horizontal integration. That's integration through time, which is often missed. These three integration challenges are seldom easy to keep in harmony. Issues arise when capability is developed without due regard for integration. You might get the most modern and technologically advanced weapon system, but if it is not integrated, the effect it can achieve is suboptimal. And there are many examples in the ADF of that today. The importance of the effort to design the force thoroughly and keep the design current as changes occur in, for example, the threat, the technology, the concepts, or even the budget, is one of the preeminent tasks for the ADF, right behind sustaining today's warfighters. Navy, of all services, best understands the imperative to design thoroughly up front and adapt from a comprehensive design as we build the ship, especially the first one. Design is the realisation of a concept into a plan to achieve a strategy. For integrated capability to be achieved, a significant effort must be exerted in comprehensive design from the beginning of the capability development phase. I'll use 4 principles to highlight what I consider to be the priorities for the enhancements to our integration effort and an integrated force. Let me explain each. The first principle: force design is a full-time job. The current strategic planning framework has Defence conducting a force structure review every 5 years. The people who conduct it, on at least the last 3 occasions that I've spent my time in Canberra, have been drawn from across the department into a one-off team for the duration of the task, usually about 12 months. They commence an examination of the inputs to what might affect the development of the plan to modernise the ADF. These include the threat, the technology, the strategy, the concepts, etc., for how we intend to fight, to name but a few. The FSR assiduously gathers up issues, commonly referred to in Defence as issues papers, developed by, called for at the beginning of the FSR from within the department for all of those involved in maintaining capability in the ADF and other strategic capabilities. The opportunity for thorough analysis comes after an articulation of how Defence describes its business in a common ADF lexicon, often referred to as the partitioning scheme, which in part at least has not remained stable between FSRs. If time permits, some modelling and experimentation is conducted with support from DSTO, utilising tools and techniques that were brushed off from 5 years ago, and at the end of the period, the members of the FSR team return to their workplaces back in Defence with an approved DCP. That's not good enough. The second principle is that all capabilities must be joint. All capabilities are joint. For the ADF to be an integrated force, there first needs to be a recognition in kind that every service need is actually a joint need. The projects labelled as joint are not the only projects with a joint requirement. Joint is not just the glue projects. So-called glue capabilities are the integrating capabilities, but there are many characteristics of all capabilities that make them joint. Several of our coalition partners use techniques such as multi-criteria decision analysis to do a high-level exploration of the functions all of the significant service needs would generate for the total force. This analysis is generally led by a joint officer who represents the Chief of the Defence Force. It represents his interests in ensuring the coherence of the entire Defence Force. In the US, that's the J8. This analysis also often involves other central government agencies in other countries who find the exercise assists in them aligning what Defence refers to as capabilities to national tasking. So in the minds of those in central government or central agencies, they see what we do in terms of what can we get the ADF to do, not necessarily the same way we describe it. So having them involved at the start so you get a whole of government joint needs approach is essential. The third principle is that issues are issues and not necessarily projects. This involves understanding the difference between issues and gaps raised by military professionals and understanding what work needs to be done by professional project managers as distinct from subject matter experts to bring the required change. The DCP has famously been criticised as a listing of issues, or as our two previous ministers have referred to it as, quote, a shopping list, unquote. It reflects an aggregation of gaps and issues which are prioritised and sequenced, rather than a plan for modernisation that accounts for the complexities and skill required to develop and acquire capability in the form of a project management regime. Everyone knows that a plan gets you to the starting blocks and is the basis from which to make changes as circumstances change. Mixing issues with project management is at the centre of the debate about how long service personnel should spend in project management roles. There are two separate skills. Capability development analysis by subject matter experts is a service-related skill, and project management is a project management professional skill. And they are not necessarily used the same people, although we've been obliged to in CDG for the last 10 years. The fourth principle is that innovation is indispensable, but it takes nerve to keep investing. Innovation is the result of critical and creative thinking and the conversion of inventions and technology, processes and ideas into better outcomes and effects. Innovation comes in many forms. I'll note the opportunity for the ADF to innovate in three short examples. The first is the traditional learn by doing. We all talk about this, but I don't see a lot of it. This involves smaller buys to test concepts and ideas and to learn from them, leading to better and quicker decisions about acquisitions. This could be as simple as introducing a UAS, an unmanned aerial system, onto a ship to better learn more quickly the utility and benefit of such a technology at sea. Or accepting that a continuous build of a surface combatant is likely to allow us to institutionally learn and include innovation on subsequent builds of the ship. The establishment of digger works, for example, is a classic example of the application of this principle. The second is the missed opportunity to harness our ex-servicemen and women now in industry. In my experience, the best ideas for how we might do our job differently or innovate, given the innovation evident in Australian industry, especially from our SMEs, comes from those who have been in our business who are now in a position to see the opportunities and applications afforded by what industry has to offer. After all, is that not one of the reasons why defence industry takes ex-servicemen and women in? We could take a much greater advantage of this diaspora. Our US and UK counterparts do this much better. And the third example is the insertion of the application of service judgment in the tender evaluation process, balancing requirements. This is likely to be more effective with the recent inclusion of the, quote, very important criteria in the functional and performance specifications. It will allow the inclusion of innovation offered in the tender responses traded off against more than just equipment specifications. That is, to permit the truly integrated application of all of the fundamental inputs to capability, which are the primary interest of the capability managers, rather than simply ruling out that which did not meet an obsolete or inappropriate essential requirement. There should be no essential requirements. There should be no need for essential requirements in our function and performance specifications. But we have to have the service chiefs and the CDS representative need a greater say in balancing those requirements. So in conclusion, let me reiterate that designing the capability to be integrated is the important front end of modernisation. Designing the capability. Not once every 5 years, but designing it all the time and keeping the plan. There is not a group or service in our department that does not devote significant resources and have coordination effort devoted to supporting the capability development challenge. But while every corner of the department has an interest and a perspective, it is the CDF who has the responsibility to ensure the Australian Defence Force has the right mix and balance of modern capabilities and the right range of capabilities and at the right levels of preparedness to achieve the missions the Australian Government will demand. And ensuring we get the right balance, what capability we do have must be appropriately integrated vertically, horizontally and over time to the extent that we get the best effect for the taxpayer's dollar. Force design is a full-time job. Every capability must be incorporated into the design from a basis of examining all needs as joint needs. Our efforts to turn ideas and needs into capability must be professionalised by better management of the issues to project continuum, and we will struggle to maintain the edge that we claim allows us to punch above our weight if we do not facilitate effective adoption of innovation. Our integrated ADF into the future will depend upon it. Thank you.
Thank you, Radin, and good morning, senior officers and ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be here. Difficult to follow my boss, of course, my senior boss, whose enthusiasm for his integrated capability in defence cannot be unparalleled. It's unparalleled anywhere else. And most importantly today, my discussion is about the future frigate program, about where we're at and about what our intentions are moving forward, just to give you an update. I will talk about capability options. We must remember, of course, that the government has not seen a lot of those options yet. They have been advised on one occurrence, and we'll talk about that. But what you must take away today is that this is the first project that will actually run the integrated capability document, meaning the discussion you just heard from the General will be part of the operational concept document as an integrated force. And we will not be able to get past gate processes, which are going to be discussed by the Minister very soon, without actually presenting those, to ensure that the capability that we do deliver is fully integrated into the ADF. So the acquisition of 8 future frigates, and I'll use that term 8, and I'll give you reasons why in a moment, loosely, because the FSR, of course, is the deciding factor, and it hasn't finished the deliberations yet. But it was supposed to be, these future frigates, larger and more capable than the Royal Australian Navy's current ANZAC class. And this was first announced, as we all know, in the Australian Government's Defence White Paper in 2009. The future frigate was not just a replacement for the ANZAC class, and the 2009 White Paper described them as having a strong emphasis on submarine detection and response operations, equipped with an integrated sonar suite that includes a long-range active towed array sonar and capable of embarking a combination of naval combat, helicopters and maritime uninhabited aerial vehicles. The introduction of the future frigates, along with the Seahawk Romeo helicopters, which is occurring right now, the Romeo is coming online, we have over 12 of them come into country already, with active dipping sonar arrays, we'll see reinvigoration of the anti-submarine warfare, ASW, into the Royal Australian Navy. That said, the term ASW frigate was being commonly used to describe this ship, the future frigate, within defence and industry from 2009, but no one really was able to quantify what the term ASW frigate meant. This fact, when combined with the need to employ the ship across a broader spectrum of operations, as well as the fact that our Hobart-class DDGs currently being built in Adelaide, South Australia, will deliver an ASW capability far superior than anything previously in service in the RAN, has led to a broader consideration of the role of the C5000 future frigate. This expanded scope was emphasised in the 2013 White Paper, where the future major surface combatants, being our Hobart-class DDG and the future frigates, were described as having broad utility across the full spectrum of maritime operations, and that the surface combatants would transition to a future fleet with a greater emphasis on anti-submarine warfare. Now, when discussing the future frigate, it has now been described as a general-purpose frigate that has enhanced ASW capabilities in recognition of the need to deploy the platform to theatres like the Middle East area of operations and prolonged operations in a maritime security role, and the need to be able to complement the Hobart-class destroyer in a task group scenario, designed around escorting and protecting a Canberra-class LHD. This leads to a conclusion that, in addition to its ASW capabilities, the future frigate needs an air defence capability. Although formally announced by the government in 2009, this project was actually only formally commenced in May 2013. The timing was due to a number of reasons, one of the most significant of which was that the Navy was in the process of defining its initial capability needs. That process, as discussed yesterday by the Chief of Navy, is an iterative process. It was necessary to spend the time fleshing out and maturing the needs, and as a result of the work, we now have a greater clarity on what this platform is going to look like in a broad capability terms. While the ships were seen as ANZAC replacements, just bigger and with newer technologies, we were really looking at a paradigm shift in our thinking and perhaps setting the scene for surface combatants of the future. That is multi-role, concurrent role ships capable of operating at extended ranges for sustained periods of time, offering greater flexibility to government than we have seen in the past. By this I mean that in addition to providing the high-end traditional warfare capabilities, including a bias towards ASW, we need to design whilst the ships to deal with the asymmetric and non-state actor threats whilst conducting the traditional maritime security interdiction operations that have become so common over the last 20 years. In 2014, we took the then classified initial capability definition statement from the Chief of Navy and turned that into a two-page summary of the top-level requirements at the unclassified level. And as you remember from yesterday, the Chief said he wasn't going to talk about top-level requirements. Well, I am. And there's good reason for that. Because, as I mentioned a moment ago, it's iterative. It's a process that we are still continuing. Now, those top-level requirements were then turned into a 10-page unclassified document that drew down on the 2013 White Paper and the Australian Maritime Doctrine to explain the anticipated roles in the employment of the future frigate. The document also contained the top-level requirements agreed with the Chief of Navy at that time. It was subsequently released to industry in July last year at a Defence Industry Conference, the D&I, as an early guide on what Defence was seeking in the platform. The need to engage with industry with our initial thoughts on the expected top-level requirements is key to understanding initial statement of the need and the initial intent of our need for the Chief of Navy. As the force structure review has also been occurring over the last 12 months or more, the project has continued to refine the capability need and therefore the top-level requirement from a whole-of-force perspective, and continues to undergo with industry think tanks and DSO the refinement and modelling necessary to achieve this aim. We've been using both RAPID, which is part of the CDG group, and also RAND in doing this. This is expected to continue until at least the end of this year, when we are scheduled to complete our draft operational concept document and functional performance specification. Depending on the outcomes of the first principles review, which will be released, I think, at about 12:45 today, a C5000 is currently continuing to follow the standard two-pass process for government approval. However, with a project of this size, it was not possible to develop the knowledge required for whatever process we're going to go into, whether it be first pass or what I'm hearing is a first gate or zero gate process, to develop the knowledge required. And so what we went to last year, in June of last year, was to government what we have termed an initial pass. At this pass, we detailed the intent for the execution of the project, defining the need and the broad capability options at its first pass levels, and sought government direction on early decisions that can be made to ease the design process. The focus on the project to drive to an ability to replace the ANZAC class for the future frigate as close as possible to the end of life of the first ANZAC class hull was the aim. At initial pass, government also agreed to continue the development journey with a possible radar capability contender for the future frigate, that of the CEA Technologies high-powered version of the radar system that continues to provide excellent performance for our ASMD upgraded ANZAC class ships. But a bit more on that later. Now, as with all large capability submissions, the importance of providing options for government is paramount. It doesn't matter which nation you come from, but in this initial pass, government opted to consider early one of the capability options and assess its feasibility. It was mentioned yesterday by the Minister, and that of modifying the currently being built Hobart-class DDG, Air Warfare Destroyer. The reasoning behind this choice was one of determining if we could achieve the intended schedule for replacing the ANZACs through a rolling build program with a hull that is system commonality. And we'll talk about the capability options set shortly. I want you to look at this slide, because what it's showing you in a nutshell is effectively Australia's surface combatant building program through to 2033 as it stands now. Now, the journey to initial operational capability. These dates are not set in concrete. Government may make changes at any time, as I'm sure you would understand. But what we're trying to show you here, and you can probably see between 2017 and 2021, effectively that area is what they're referring to as the Valley of Death that the Minister's referred to. But although government has not yet agreed to a date for either first or second pass, or whatever process they implement, to allow the necessary time to complete the journey to first steel being cut for the first of class of the future frigate, we could expect a 2016 first pass equivalent government consideration, and then a 2018 second pass. Now, this graphic has been done showing you what is typically been experienced in defence on the builds of the program. Now, the Minister talked yesterday about efficiencies and the importance of government increasing those efficiencies. This has tried to take into account some of those moving forward. But the important part is the future frigate initial operational capability, the period 2026 to effectively 2030. That period is critical such that the Chief of Navy can have the replacement of the ANZACs coming as they depart. First of all, the first one of those is 2027, and that should, we at the moment believe, would be HMAS ANZAC. So what has actually happened since we went to initial pass in July of last year? Now, we've worked closely with industry, as I mentioned before, on the further understand the feasibility of modifying the Hobart-class DDG design. We worked with Navantia, Saab, Australia and CEA Technologies. We've continued our journey with CEA Technologies to develop a high-powered version of the CFAR radar system. All signs continue to look very positive. And we have continued to refine our capability document set to enable us to generate our OCD and functional performance specification by the end of this year. But we've also engaged industry heavily and will continue to do so, irrespective of the first principles review, to ensure that we try to achieve the dates that you see here. Of note, of course, is that this final schedule for the future frigate will be driven by the government's enterprise naval shipbuilding plan and recommendations that come out of the government's defence first principles review. Our acquisition organisation, the Defence Material Organisation, are working through the development of an acquisition strategy for this project, but it's fair to say that there are three broad options for the selection of the design for the future frigate. The first is to go pure military off the shelf. This would involve the selection of a proven frigate design in service at the time of the decision. This design would only be modified to meet Australian regulatory or environmental compliance issues. Essentially, Navy would take the platform as it is and run with it. Whilst there are many frigates on the market today, initial investigation indicates there are a few that have the potential to meet Navy's complete needs. The second option is to take a current design and modify it to meet Australian needs. This evolution would not need to be extensive. However, it would likely include the inclusion of a minimum number of missile cells, which would be derived from operational analysis activities in a force posture perspective, using a task group, as well as single ship steaming, an Australian specified combat management system, and the inclusion of the Australian design and developed radar suite from CEA Technologies. There are many options currently available that would meet this acquisition strategy, including further evolution, as we've said already, about the Navantia designed Hobart-class DDGs. This is an option-rich environment which provides plenty of alternate designs for our consideration, another two of which were of course mentioned by the Minister yesterday. And the final option is a platform from scratch, designing one from scratch. This is indeed an option that would deliver the best match for the Navy that needs in the platform. However, it comes at both a price in terms of dollars and schedule. To design a ship from a blank sheet of paper would add significant design cost to the project, and as well as increasing the delivery schedule by what is estimated to be between 2 to 3 years. At the initial pass in 2014, Government directed this option was not to be considered further. Now to the top-level requirements, remembering that when you read these are about the evolving. It's an iterative process, but there needs to be that baseline. As mentioned previously, we're still in that process of evolving these top-level requirements, underpinned by appropriate operational analysis, but from our initial baseline, the needs are, for the top-level requirement, deliver 8, and I put the question mark as I said because this will be determined by the force structure review, future frigates which will complement other assets operating in a task group and be capable of achieving effects across the full spectrum of maritime operations from low constabulary operations to high-end warfighting with an emphasis on anti-submarine warfare. Deliver a comprehensive task group anti-submarine capability and make significant contributions to theatre anti-submarine warfare. The capacity to do so will be provided through an integrated sensor suite which may include long-range active passive towed sonar, hull-mounted sonar, torpedo decoys, surface-launched torpedoes and an organic aviation capability. Provide an organic aviation facilities supporting at least one fully integrated MH-60 Romeo helicopter or a mix of MH-60 Romeo and uninhabited aerial systems to deliver highly capable standoff, ASW and anti-surface warfare capability. Deliver anti-surface warfare capabilities including asymmetric threat defence and standoff strike capability in a flexible and dynamic joint fires environment in the maritime, amphibious and land domains. Complement other assets in the task group by contributing to air defence and task group AS&D capabilities, including the use of a long-range air search radars, hard and soft kill weapon systems and the ability to participate in cooperative real-time sensor and weapon networks. All of those top-level requirements on that slide were talked about yesterday by the US. We will continue into the more hull and mechanical and electrical, but if feasible but highly desirable, be able to embark modular mission payloads to supplement underwater systems or to increase wide area surveillance capability. The ability of the future frigate, not too dissimilar to where the UK have gone with their Type 26, to be able to use modular mission payloads to change between vessels, and you may have heard that also mentioned yesterday with regards to the OPV, and the future frigate is also being considered. Provide a comprehensive and persistent command, control and coordination capability in support of subsurface, surface and air warfare and make significant contributions to future joint and combined operations. The capacity to do so will be provided through the provision of embarked commander facilities, a full range of contemporary networking capabilities such as Link 16, 22 and variable message format, and a multi-spectrum communications suite. Deliver a future frigate with displacement that allows appropriate future growth, survivability, endurance and seakeeping qualities. Now, if appropriate, maximise platform and mission system commonality from within the Royal Australian Navy's existing fleet to improve operational flexibility, reduce workforce requirements and reduce through-life support costs. We mentioned yesterday, of course, where the Chief of Navy talked about affordability. Deliver a hull with an acoustic radiated noise signature, magnetic signature, electric potential signature, infrared signature and radar cross-section that is well documented, understood, able to be effectively managed through life and appropriate for the emerging threat. And when fully transitioned into service, the complete impact of a future frigate on the ADF workforce requirements should be, as far as possible, personnel neutral from the current ANZAC class. Alternate crewing methodologies, higher levels of automation, simulation, smart monitoring, smart maintenance systems and practice will all need to be considered as a means to achieve a high operational tempo whilst maintaining sustainable crew numbers. And finally, deliver a capability through simulation, a high level of training towards crew qualifications conducted on board and ashore. The future frigate will be the first of the frigates of the Australian Navy ships to have a truly integrated, and this is a vision that we have a truly integrated net on board, integrating both the combat management system, CNM, all land systems to be able controlled by a single console. This is being looked at from a feasibility perspective, but of course aimed at ensuring from the Chief of Navy's perspective reduced affordability and more simplicity, especially reducing the crew numbers. I'd like now to finally discuss a possible future frigate capability that is ship design agnostic, that of the CEA Technology CFAR radar system. Over the last few years, CEA Technologies here in Fyshwick, Canberra ACT, has developed a digital beamforming active phased array radar technology which has been successfully implemented in our ANZAC class frigate ASND, Anti-Ship Missile Defence program, and is currently fielded in 3 of our upgraded ANZAC frigates, which will complete the upgrades by middle of 2017. This company is listed as Australian priority industry capability by the government due to their assessed potential for development and growth. The radar technology that has been developed is world leading, has significant export potential and is not just a radar. Due to the success of the program in the ANZAC frigates and the recognised capability edge that it provides to the Royal Australian Navy and the ADF, further funding is being spent on taking this technology and developing it further as part of the C5000 program. Under C5000, we are working with CEA Technologies to evolve the anti-ship missile defence radar technology being installed in the ANZAC class, developing it to a long-range, high-powered, active phased array radar, also capable of conducting air defence in addition to ASND. If this development is successful and CEA achieves assessment milestones that demonstrates their capability, not too dissimilar to what we did with the CFAR system originally for the ANZACs, government may consider this technology as an option for the future frigate. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the opportunity to provide you with an overview of where the C5000 future frigate program currently is. Capability option set that you've heard about, maybe not in the greatest detail, but again, as I mentioned before, government have yet to consider the full capability option set. But one of the things that has gone through this presentation has been what the Chief of Navy has been pressing. It's about lethality, capability effects, ship availability and affordability of the project. This is not a project which is going to be gold-plated. It's one that's taken in perspective on the entire force posture with regards to the force structure review and cost and affordability. It's being weighed by them up against all the other capability effects for the ADF. Thank you.
Right, seeing you're a panel of one.
This was more a question for General Caligari. Just wondering if plans for Sheba and Jericho and Navy's new generation Navy whether they make the job of integration easier or harder, or if they're just a necessary evil.
I think the General would probably say, MIPA has been around for a while, of course. Jericho just announced. He mentioned, of course, having an ability to do integration up front as a force in total. Maybe that all should have happened up front. But what he would say is that, of course, it's important to ensure that those two, as they're moving forward, are fully work together with the Navy's integration requirements in their force to be able to have a common thread that goes through. Doing them separately would be wrong. And I know the force structure review has actually looked at that.
Julie.
Yeah, Julian Kevin, James Navy International. The one or two presentations in the last couple of days, plus anecdotal evidence, suggests that the apparent limit of 7,000 tonnes on the future frigate could perhaps be a minimum requirement rather than a maximum. Any comment?
I didn't know there was a set period of tonnage. As mentioned by the Chief of Navy yesterday, it's about the capability effect. We put options up to government. It's about the affordability across the force with regards to the DCP. If we require that based upon the need, and it's agreed by the Secretary and CDS through the force structure review, then that's what will be put up. But at the moment, we're not putting a tonnage limit on this, or minimum tonnage. But in reality, as we know, it was mentioned by Ms. yesterday, 3,900 tonnes is where the ANZAC is now, and they're currently at their maximum load. Any further technology that you put on there to do the additional duties, especially from ASW, will require that to increase. We don't refer to tonnage anymore.
Any other questions, please? Right at the back again, getting your exercise.
Along with capability, has the Navy considered and developed any thinking around the timeline at which they can take the future frigate into service, the interval between each hull?
That will be a combination between the Chief of Navy determining what he can take on, in addition to what is the drumbeat that the production of those hulls is. And I know that the enterprise level naval shipbuilding has a defined drumbeat, and when that's publicly released, and of course it's working with industry to determine that it's feasible, which they already did originally, that will fall out. If the Chief of Navy can't take it, then he'll have to do something about that, and maybe they'll change the drumbeat. Like, it might be, ultimately we know that it's going to be somewhere between 2 to 2.5 years. I do know that he's had that discussion, and he's reasonably comfortable with that. But as I must admit, industry will say, for example, some manufacturers, that that's far too long. But at the end of the day, it's got to be what defence requires as the output.
Thanks, Malcolm. Other questions? Okay, on that note, thanks very much, Rod, for bringing that clarity to us, and all the best for the SLG. Thank you.